By sunrise, Mercy Crossing had already written Mara Whitcomb's price on a slate outside the courthouse. Not the price of her land, not the price of her mule. Hers, and beside her name, in smaller chalk, were the names of her children. Annie, 8 Jonah. 6, the law called it a household lien. The clerk called it settlement of debts. The men gathering in the square called it business. But when Mara saw that slate, she understood the cleaner word. They meant to sell her. She was standing on the courthouse steps with one hand on Annie's shoulder, and the other holding Jonah's fingers so tightly the boy did not dare pull away. The morning was pale and windless. Dust rested in the street like it was afraid to move. Over the mercantile roof, the sun came up thin and copper, colored, and every window in town seemed to have a face behind it. Deputy Rowan Pike would not meet her eyes. That told her more than the paper in his hand. Mara Whitcomb, he said, because the paper required her full name. By order of Pima County Court, the estate of Elias Whitcomb is found insolvent. His surviving household is to be placed under bonded service until the remainder is discharged. Annie looked up at her. "Ma," she whispered, "what does bonded mean?" Mara felt the whole square lean toward the question. "It means," Mara said, keeping her voice steady, "that some people are using a long word because they are ashamed of a short one." The deputy's jaw tightened. The clerk beside him, Mr. Wilkes Hatton, coughed into his hand and pretended to study the paper. He was a soft, clean man with ink on his cuffs and no weather in his face. Behind him stood Ransom Dyer, owner of the Golden Spur Saloon, half the freight wagons in the district, and most of the favors that moved through Mercy Crossing after dark. Dara smiled at Mara like she had known about Eli's debts after the burial. She had found them in an oilskin packet beneath the loose board under his bed. Notes, loans, freight advances, promises written in his hand and countersigned by men who had known exactly how desperate he was becoming. Her husband had not been evil. That was the hard part. He had been hopeful in the dangerous way men could be hopeful when they confused a plan with a miracle. He had loved her. He had loved the children. And still, his love had left them at the foot of the courthouse steps, while a clerk sharpened a pencil. The auction board had been dragged out beside the horse trough. There were chairs arranged for the important men. Someone had brought coffee. That detail nearly broke her. Not the paper. Not the deputy, not even the word bonded, the coffee. Because a town that could sip coffee while a mother and 2 children were priced in the open air was a town that had already decided what it was. Clerk Haddon lifted the notice and began reading the terms. Mara stopped listening after the first sentence. She watched the faces instead. Mr. Keene from the feed store, Mrs. Voss from the church committee, the blacksmith's boys perched on a rail, men who had nodded to Eli, women who had borrowed salt from her kitchen, people who looked away, and people who did not. She did not look away from any of them. Fear liked to erase details. Mara collected them. Opening service bid, Haddon called, $19. A few men shifted. A cough moved through the crowd. Then Ransom Dyer raised 2 fingers. 25. He did not look at the children, only at Mara. Another man bid 30. A sheep broker from San Xavier who smelled of tobacco and old wool. Dyer raised it to 40 before Haddon finished repeating the number. Annie's fingers dug into Mara's skirt. Jonah's face had gone blank, which frightened Mara more than tears would have. Jonah only went blank when he was storing something too large for a child to carry. "Ma," he said. His voice was small, but the square heard it anyway. "Are we bad?" Mara turned from the crowd. She crouched in the dust in front of her son, though every eye in Mercy Crossing was on her back. "No," she said. "You hear me? You are not bad. Your sister is not bad, and I am not bad." "Then why are they doing it?" "Because the law can be dressed up and still be cruel. Because debt gives cowards a respectable coat, because your father believed a man who charged interest by the week." She said none of that. She touched his cheek. "Because grown people sometimes build wrong things and call them necessary." Jonah looked past her at the slate. "Can they take us?" Mara stood. "They can try." Dyer's smile widened. 60, he said. The broker stopped bidding. The crowd breathed out, disappointed and relieved at once. Haddon lifted the pencil. $60 from Mr. Ransom, Dyer. Do I hear? 140. The voice came from the back of the square. It did not shout. It did not need to. It landed like a hammer on a church bell. Every head turned, and a man stood by the hitching rail, dust on his coat, hat low, shoulders broad enough to make the men around him seem unfinished. He had ridden in quietly enough that nobody had noticed. His horse was lathered at the neck. His boots were gray with miles. Mara knew the name before she knew the face. Silas Vale of Cinder Wash, a rancher from the high country east of the river, a man who owned water in a place where water was as close to power as God allowed. He rarely came to town. He did not drink at the Golden Spur. He did not trade favors with Dyer, which meant half the town thought he was proud, and the other half thought he was dangerous. Dyer turned slowly. His smile stayed on his mouth, but left his eyes. "That is a foolish bid," Dyer said. Silas Vale hooked one thumb in his belt. "It is a bid. Nobody asked you to make a spectacle of yourself." "No," Silas said. "That part was already done." A murmur ran through the square. Hatton looked from Dyer to Silas, suddenly aware that ink and law were thinner protections than he had hoped. 140, the clerk repeated. Dyer raised his chin. 150. 200, Silas said. This time the quiet came all at once. Even the coffee man stopped pouring. Mara felt Annie move closer against her side. Jonah's hand found hers again. Dyer stared at Silas for a long moment. It was the stare of a man discovering that a door he believed locked had opened from the other side. Then Dyer laughed once. A small, dry sound. "You'll regret paying so much for trouble," he said. Silas looked past him, straight at Mara. "I have paid more for less." Dyer's face hardened, but he did not bid again. Haddon cleared his throat twice before his voice worked. "Sold," he said, "to Mr. Silas Vale of Cinder Wash Ranch." Sold. The word hit Mara like cold water, though the man who had bought them was not smiling. Silas crossed the square. People moved aside with the cautious speed of those who suddenly remembered other errands. He stopped 3 steps from Mara, far enough not to crowd her. "Mara Whitcomb." "Yes, my wagon is by the livery," he said. "If you want out of this square, we should leave now." "If I want," he nodded once. "You paid $200. "I paid the lien." Mara held his gaze. "What is the difference?" Silas glanced down at Jonah, then back to her. "The paper is mine. The road after it belongs to you." That was not enough to trust him, but it was enough to move. Mara lifted the small carpet bag that held all that remained of their former life. 2 dresses, 1 shirt for each child. Annie's blue ribbon, Jonah's slate, Eli's old pocket watch, broken at 4:20. She had packed the watch because she could not decide whether she hated it. Silas did not offer to carry the bag. For reasons Mara could not yet name. She was grateful. They walked through the square together, not beside him, not behind him. Mara walked with Annie on one side and Jonah on the other, while Silas walked half a step ahead, clearing space without making it look like a performance. At the edge of the crowd, Mrs. Voss whispered something to another woman. Mara turned her head. The whisper stopped. Good, Mara thought. Learned that I can still hear. The wagon ride out of the road lifted from Mesquite Flats into red country, where the land opened into ridges and dry washes, and sky too large to be friendly. Annie fell asleep against the flour sacks. Jonah stayed awake, watching Silas the way he watched snakes, storms, and strangers with knives. After an hour, Mara spoke. What service do you expect? Silas kept his hands loose on the reins. Cooking if you can. Accounts if you read figures. Mending. Whatever work is honest and agreed upon. And the children? They remain children. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have. She looked at the side of his face. He had a scar near his jaw that disappeared into his beard. Not old enough to be forgotten. Not new enough to invite questions. If I leave, then you leave. With them? His mouth tightened as if the question offended him. But not because she had asked it. With them. And the 200? Gone. No debt. No debt. Mara gave a short laugh. It had no humor in it. Men do not spend $200 and ask nothing. Silas looked at the road ahead. Some men do. Why? The horses walked through a patch of shade, and for a moment the whole wagon cooled. Silas took his time. When I was 10, he said, my mother worked 14 months in a laundry owned by the man who held my father's note. He called it lawful. I called it watching her hands bleed. Mara said nothing. She died before he considered the debt satisfied. The wagon wheels creaked over a stone. I did not have $200 then. He looked at her. I had it this morning. Mara turned away first, not because she believed him completely, because she believed him enough that it was dangerous. Cinderwash Ranch sat behind a timber gate that had been repaired so many times. It looked less built than argued into existence. Beyond it stood a long adobe house, a barn with a new roof, a windmill turning slow against the bright sky, and a row of cottonwoods marking the wash where water moved underground, even when the surface looked dry. A woman came out before the wagon stopped. She was tall, narrow, gray-haired, and carried herself like a broom could become a weapon in her hand, if the day required it. This is Mrs. Tamsin Reed, Silas said. She runs the house because nobody else is brave enough. Mrs. Reed looked Mara over, then Annie, then Jonah, then the carpet bag. Hungry? She asked. Annie nodded before remembering to be afraid. Then come in. That was the welcome. It was better than pity. The room they gave Mara and the children faced the wash. It had one bed, a washstand, a cedar chest, and a window with a latch that worked. Mara checked the latch twice. Then she checked the hinges, the floorboards, and the distance to the back door. Mrs. Reed saw her do it. Good, the woman said. Mara looked up. Mrs. Reed shrugged. Women who do not check exits are either lucky or dead. That was when Mara decided she might survive the house. The first weeks at Cinderwash were not soft. They were busy, which was better. Mara learned the stove, the pantry, the well schedule, the ranch hands' appetites, and the accounts ledger Silas kept in a locked drawer, but handed to her on the 4th day. You trust me with this? She asked. No, he said. I trust arithmetic. If the numbers go wrong, they will say so. It was the nearest thing to a joke she had heard from him. She found 3 mistakes by supper. Silas stared at the corrected column for a long moment. Then he said, Mrs. Reed. From the stove, Mrs. Reed said, Yes, give Mrs. Whitcomb whatever key she asks for. Annie attached herself to the kitchen, learning from Mrs. Reed how to read yeast, how to stretch beans, how to make vinegar pie taste like a choice instead of an apology. Jonah followed a ranch hand named Amos, who had 1 bad knee, 2 missing teeth, and the grave patience of a man who understood wounded creatures. On the 6th morning, Jonah asked Amos for work that counts. Amos handed him a brush and pointed to a saddle. Make that count, Jonah did. Little by little, the children stopped flinching at door sounds. Little by little, Mara stopped waking before dawn with her hand already reaching for them. Silas did not push. That unsettled her more than pushing would have. He let Annie sit beside Mrs. Reed and peel apples badly until she learned to peel them well. He did not call Mara brave in the tone people used when they wanted suffering to look decorative. That may have been the first kindness she trusted, not praise. The first warning came in November, with a rider from the South Line. A boy named Cale came in with dust up to his shoulders and fear making him older than he was. Dyer bought the Monroe freight lease, he told Silas in the yard, and he's offering money on the dry farms below the wash. Silas took the news without moving much. Mara was carrying a basket of laundry. She stopped because she had learned that danger often entered quietly and wore practical language. Why would a saloon man want dry farms? She asked. Cale looked at Silas. Silas looked at her. Because dry farms sit along the road to my water, he said. That was when Mara understood Mercy Crossing had not been the end of anything. It had been the opening of a gate. Dyer did not only want her that day in the square. He had wanted Silas to owe him caution. He had wanted the town to see Silas interfere. He had wanted a reason to begin drawing lines around Cinder Wash. Then he will come, Mara said. Silas nodded. When he has enough cover. And are you ready? Getting ready? Mara set the laundry basket down. Men like Dyer use waiting as a weapon. Do not admire your patience so much you mistake it for a plan. Cale stared at her. Silas did not. He only looked at her with a slight change in his face, as if a lamp had been moved in a room he thought he knew. No, he said. I will not. Dyer came in person 2 weeks later. Mara had taken the wagon into Mercy Crossing for coffee, salt, lamp oil, and nails. Silas had ridden separately to speak with the sheriff. They were supposed to meet outside the Mercantile at noon. Dyer found her at 10 minutes to Mara Whitcomb, he said, stepping off the boardwalk as if the street belonged to him. You look healthier than I expected. 2 men stood behind him. One had a broken nose. The other had hands like fence posts. Mara kept the crate of lamp oil balanced against her hip. Mr. Dyer, no gratitude. For what? For not taking offense, he said. A woman in your position ought to value men who can overlook insult. Mara looked at the street behind him. 3 people had slowed to watch. I have found men overlook what profits them. His smile thinned. You think veil can keep you respectable up there? The crate grew heavy in her arms. She did not shift it. I think respectability is the word small towns use when they want to sound kinder than appetite. Before Mara could answer, Silas spoke from behind her. Her price was never yours to calculate. Mara did not turn. She only let herself breathe. Silas stepped beside her, not in front beside. He took the crate from her arms with a practicality that made the gesture more intimate than ceremony would have. Dyer watched it. So that is the arrangement, he said. Silas's voice stayed level. The arrangement is this. Mara Whitcomb and her children are under my roof by choice. Any business you have with Cinderwash comes to me. Any word you have for her, you swallow. A small crowd had gathered now. Dyer saw it too. His eyes moved from Silas to Mara and back again, doing arithmetic of a different sort. By choice, he repeated. Mara turned to the crowd before Silas could answer. Yes, she said clearly. By choice. I was not carried to Cinderwash. I was not locked there. I was not bought there. Mr. Vale paid a court. Lien, the rest of you were content to watch. Be careful how you repeat the story. I remember the original. No one spoke. Dyer's face did not change, but something in it closed. He tipped his hat. Then I suppose we all understand one another. He walked away. Silas loaded the crate into the wagon. His hands were steady. Mara's were not. Now that the danger had passed, he noticed and did not mention it. On the ride back, she said, You heard him. Yes. He will use what he thinks people believe about me, yes. And about you, I know. Mara watched the road tilt upward toward the red hills. Then do not let the town decide the shape of your truth. Silas glanced at her. What shape should it have? The question should have been easy. It was not. Mara looked ahead. One that does not make a cage out of protection. Silas was quiet for a long while. Then he said, That is fair. The raid came on a night cold enough to make the stars look sharpened. A rider reached Cinderwash after midnight with news from the lower farms. A barn burned. Horses scattered. Silas woke the hands within minutes. Mara came into the hall before he knocked. What is it? Trouble on the south line. Dyer, likely. What do you need? He looked at her, and she saw the old instinct in him, the one that wanted to protect by enclosing. She lifted her chin. Do not choose wrong. Silas exhaled once. The rifle over the pantry door is loaded. Spare cartridges in the blue tin. Keep Mrs. Reed and the children in the center room. Do not open for anyone unless the word is cottonwood. Cottonwood, she repeated. If fire reaches the hay shed, leave the house by the wash door and take them to the stone cellar. Go, she said. He went. No speech, no promise, no touching. There was no time for the kind of drama people imagine they want and fear. There was only the door closing behind him and the sudden knowledge that she had work to do. Mara woke Annie first, then Jonah. Mrs. Reed arrived in the center room carrying a shotgun with the calm of a woman bringing bread from an oven. Thought we might need this, she said. Jonah looked at the gun. Mrs. Reed looked back. Best hope we do not. They waited. Annie held Mara's wrist with one hand and Jonah's sleeve with the other. as if she could keep the family from being pulled apart by gripping both ends. Jonah sat near the hearth with Eli's broken watch in his lap. He had taken to winding it, though it never moved. Outside, the night made ordinary sounds at terrible volume. Wind against the shutters, a horse stamping, the windmill creaking once, then came the smell. Smoke. Mara was at the window before Mrs. Reed rose. A smear of orange moved beyond the south fence. Not the house, not the barn, the lower grass near the hay track. "Stay here," Mara said. Annie's grip tightened. "Ma." Mara crouched before her daughter. "I am not leaving you. I am keeping the gate." The words came before she understood them. The gate, not a yard. A gate between what had hunted them and what had begun to heal. Annie's eyes were wet. "I can help Mrs. Reed." "Yes," Mara said. "You can." She took the rifle and went outside. The cold struck hard. The sky was black and brilliant. Below the ridge, fire crawled through winter grass, too weak to become a wall but strong enough to mark a threat. Mara moved from the porch to the yard gate, then to the barn, counting shadows, listening for metal, hoof, breath. She was afraid, of course she was afraid. Courage was not a clean feeling. It was fear with its hands occupied. She checked the latch on the main gate. She checked the water barrels. She checked the hay shed. Then she stood at the entrance to Cinder Wash with the rifle in both hands, and made the decision again. The same decision she had made in the square. No one takes my children through me. 2 hours later, the riders returned. 7 shapes came up from the south. Tired horses, tired men. Silas rode in front. Mara counted them twice before she lowered the rifle. "Cottonwood," he called. Only then did she open the gate. Silas stopped when he saw her. Firelight marked a cut along his temple, and blood dried dark near his collar. "You were out here," he said. "Yes." His face tightened. Not anger, recognition. "Good," he said. That one word nearly undid her and sighed. She cleaned the cut while Mrs. Reed put coffee on, and the children pretended not to be awake. Silas told her what had happened. 6 men on the south line, 2 captured horses with Dyer's freight brand cut and burned. A can of coal oil dropped near the fence. The lower farm family safe, but the barn gone. "Can you prove him?" Mara asked. "Not yet." "Then he will come again?" "Yes." She pressed a clean cloth to his temple. "Then stop waiting for proof to arrive whole. Build it." He looked up, she continued, because the thought had been forming for weeks. Dyer wins because every frightened man thinks he is alone. The dry farmers, the freight hands, the small leases. You have water, road, access, and a name he has not managed to buy. Give them somewhere else to stand. "A cooperative," Silas said slowly. "A gate," Mara said. "One he does not control." The word hung between them. Then Silas nodded. "I can draft terms. I can read them. I know." That was the night the shape of the fight changed. Not because Silas rode harder, because Mara saw the hidden mechanism. Dyer had not built power from strength. He had built it from isolation. Each debtor alone, each farmer ashamed. Each widow made to feel like a private failure instead of a public warning. By February, Silas had 3 lower farms signed into a water and Hall partnership. By March, 5. He offered no charity that mattered. Charity could be refused by proud men. Fair terms could be studied, argued, cursed at, and finally accepted with dignity intact. Mara wrote the ledgers. Jonah watched from the corner until Silas gave him old maps to mark. Annie carried coffee to men who tried to speak around her until she corrected their sums and made one of them apologize. Dyer did not come to the ranch again. Instead, rumors came. Mara had trapped Silas. Silas had bought a wife. The children were not safe. Cinderwash was becoming a kingdom. Mara learned to let rumor spend itself against work. But one rumor came with teeth. In early April, Sheriff Calder arrived with a warrant request from Dyer's attorney. The claim was that Silas had interfered with a lawful bond sale and withheld service value owed to creditors. In plain speech, Dyer meant to drag Mara back into court and make the county decide whether she had ever been free to choose. Silas read the paper once. Mara read it twice. Then she said, "When is the hearing?" Silas looked at her. "You do not have to stand in that room." "Yes," she said. "I do." The hearing took place in the same courthouse square where the slate had stood 6 months earlier. This time there was no auction board, but the faces were the same. Mrs. Voss, Mr. Keene, the blacksmith's boys, Haddon the clerk, pale with the knowledge that paperwork sometimes returns with teeth marks. Dyer stood in a black coat beside his attorney, polished, calm, certain that law was a door he knew how to lock. Mara wore a brown dress and her mother's brass comb. Annie and Jonah stayed at Cinderwash with Mrs. Reed. Mara had wanted them spared the room. Jonah had objected. Annie had understood. Silas sat beside Mara, but when Judge Hollis called her name, she rose alone. Dyer's attorney began politely. "Mrs. Whitcomb, did Mr. Vale pay $200 at the county bond proceeding?" "He did." "And did you go with him afterward?" "I did." "And did you perform labor at Cinderwash Ranch?" "I did." The attorney turned slightly, letting the room feel the shape he was building. "So by any practical reading, Mr. Vale purchased your service?" Mara felt the room lean again, as it had leaned toward Annie's question months earlier. This time she did not crouch. This time she stood. "No," she said. The attorney blinked. "No." Mr. Vale satisfied a lien. That ended the court claim. After that, I made a work agreement because work is what decent people do when they need shelter and wages. And if you had wished to leave, I would have left. Dyer smiled faintly. With 2 children, no land, no money, and no protection. Mara turned her head and looked directly at him. "You confuse hard choices with no choices because it profits you." The judge leaned forward. Mara took the folded paper from her pocket, the original receipt from the bond sale copied from Silas's records and certified by Sheriff Calder that morning. The receipt says lien paid in full. It does not say person transferred. It does not say child transferred. It does not say obedience transferred. She placed it on the judge's table. "My father taught me to read legal words because he said the world hides knives inside them. I have read this one carefully." The judge read. Dyer's smile faded. Mara continued. "The only man in this room who's treated that paper like ownership is Mr. Dyer, which tells you what he intended to buy." The sound that moved through the room was not loud, but it was enough. Judge Hollis looked at Dyer's attorney. "Do you have a document contradicting this receipt?" The attorney's face changed by a fraction. "No, Your Honor." "Then the claim is dismissed." "Mr. Dyer," he said, "do not leave town." Dyer turned. Sheriff Calder held up a second packet. "Your freight ledgers were delivered this morning by Mr. Haddon. They include payments to men matching the description of the South Line raiders. We need to discuss that. Clerk Haddon looked like a man hoping cowardice counted as repentance if performed at the correct time. Dyer stared at him. Then at Mara. There was no smile now. Only a naked, furious disbelief that the gate had closed on the wrong side of him. Silas moved closer, not touching Mara, simply near. Dyer was taken into the sheriff's office before noon. By dusk, half of Mercy Crossing had remembered they had always suspected him. Mara did not care. On the ride home, Silas said, "You were magnificent." Mara looked at him. "No." He frowned slightly. "No, I was prepared." A slow smile touched his face. "Then you were prepared magnificently." She tried not to smile back and failed. Cinderwash changed after that. Not quickly. Real change rarely has manners. The lower farm still struggled. Dyer's men did not disappear just because he was in a cell. The town did not become kind overnight, but the pattern had cracked. Men who had whispered now came in daylight. Farmers who had signed nothing signed carefully. Sheriff Calder discovered energy once documents made caution more embarrassing than action. The gate Dyer had controlled was not gone, but it was no longer the only gate. Mara stayed. That was the part people later tried to make romantic, as if staying had happened in one warm scene with music under it. It had not. It happened in ledgers, coffee, wet boots, winter coughs, fence repairs, bad bread, better bread, late arguments, early apologies, and 100 mornings when leaving remained possible, and she did not choose it. Silas asked her to marry him in May, beneath the cottonwoods along the wash. He had clearly planned words. He lost them. Mara saw the loss happen on his face and loved him more for it. "I know I cannot undo what brought you here," he said. "I know gratitude is not love, and shelter is not a vow, so I am not asking from that place." He took off his hat, then seemed to regret having his hands busy and held it awkwardly. "I am asking because when I picture this ranch 10 years from now, you are in every honest version of it. Annie arguing with Mrs. Reed in the kitchen. Jonah telling Amos how a saddle should be mended. You at the table with the ledger open, making all of us better than we were. I want to be the man who stays, if you will have me." Mara looked past him at the wash, where water moved unseen below the stones. She thought of Eli, of love that had been real and still left damage, of the courthouse slate, of the first night she checked the window latch, of the rifle in her hands, of Silas saying the road after it belongs to you. "Yes," she said. Silas went still. "Yes, yes, but understand me, I am not saying yes because you rescued me. I know. I am not saying yes because I owe you. I know. I am saying yes because I can leave." He swallowed. "And because I do not want to." They were married in the yard 3 weeks later, with Mrs. Reed crying so angrily everyone pretended not to see it. Annie wore her blue ribbon. Jonah carried Eli's broken watch in his pocket, then handed it to Silas after the ceremony. "It does not work," Jonah said. Silas held it carefully. "I know. You fix things. Some things." Jonah looked at him for a long moment. "You can keep it until you know which kind this is." Mara kissed the top of his head after he left the room so he would not object. Annie grew into Mrs. Reed's sharpest student and eventually surpassed her in pies, accounts and terrifying delivery of short sentences. Mrs. Reed claimed not to be proud. Nobody believed her. And in the second winter after Mercy Crossing wrote Mara's price on a slate, she gave birth to a daughter with Silas's dark eyes and Mara's refusal to be hurried. They named her Clara. When Clara was 5, she asked why the front gate at Cinder Wash had so many different pieces of wood. Because it broke often, Silas said. Why not build a new one? Mara looked at the gate from the porch. Old timber. New hinge, iron brace, cottonwood peg. A thing repaired from different histories. Stronger because no one had pretended it was untouched. Because, Mara said, some gates are worth repairing. Clara considered that. Does it keep bad people out? Sometimes, Silas said. Mara shook her head. Not only that. Clara looked up. What else? Mara watched the road that led down toward Mercy Crossing. The same road that had once brought her in a wagon with a carpet bag and 2 frightened children. A good gate, she said, also reminds the people inside that they are not trapped. Years passed. The town changed in the slow, reluctant way towns do when power shifts and nobody wants to admit they were afraid of it. The Golden Spur became a feed office. The lower farms held through drought because Cinder Wash shared water at fair rates and charged on paper instead of weakness. Sheriff Calder lost an election, then won the next one after people decided courage looked better in hindsight. Mara did not become a legend. Legends were too clean. She became something more useful. A woman people came to when a contract felt wrong. A woman who could read the small print and the smaller silence. A woman who knew exactly how a respectable cruelty sounded when it cleared its throat before speaking. Sometimes strangers heard the old story and asked Silas if it was true he had bought his wife at auction. He always gave the same answer. No, he would say. I bought a debt the county should have been ashamed to hold. She decided the rest. And if Mara was near enough to hear him, she would add, he also overpaid. Then Silas would say, best money I ever lost. The children would groan because they had heard it too many times, but Clara always laughed. Years later, when the ridge light went red in the evening, and the repaired gate threw a long shadow across the yard, Mara sometimes thought about the slate outside the courthouse. The chalk, the faces, the coffee. The way Jonah had asked if they were bad. She wished she could walk back into that morning and tell the woman standing on the steps what she knew now. Not that everything would be easy. That would be a lie. Not that fear would leave. It did not. She would tell her this. A price written by cruel people is not the same as a value. A paper can say debt and still fail to name a life. A gate can be built to hold you in, or opened by someone who understands that freedom means nothing unless you can choose to stay. Mara could not go back and say those things, so she lived them instead. Every repaired hinge, every ledger line, every child sleeping unafraid behind a working latch. Every morning she woke at Cinder Wash and knew the road out was still there, and still chose the house. That was the victory. Not that no one ever tried to own her again, that the next time the world held up a paper and called it fate, Mara Whitcomb Vale knew exactly where the gate was, and she had the key.